Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Train drivers on Southern Rail have voted for fresh strikes over the summer after rejecting a pay offer. Southern's parent company, Govia Thameslink, had offered staff a 4-year deal worth nearly 24% over 4 years. But the drivers' union ASLEF has announced 3 days of strikes at the start of August after its members voted to reject the offer. Meanwhile, the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, has announced a £13 million fine, just over, for the train company for the disruption on the network. And in the Commons yesterday, he also took aim at the Labour Party.
Let's be clear about what we've been done today. I have for months said the problems on this railway are not purely down to industrial action, there are other reasons. But I'm also very clear, Mr Speaker, and so was Chris Gibbs' report, that the prime responsibility for the trouble on that network in the last few months has come from trade unions fighting the battles of 30 years ago. And still, they get support from the Labour Party. And the reality is, it is the Labour Party and the unions colluding to bring trouble to passengers, and it should stop.
Chris Grayling there in the Commons. Well, Andy MacDonald is still with us, as I said. He was opposite Chris Grayling in the Commons yesterday. And from Tunbridge Wells, we're joined by Conservative MP Hugh Merriman, who represents the Bexhill and Battle constituency on the south coast. We did ask ASLEF, the train drivers' union, if anyone was available for interview, but no one was. Anyway, delighted you two are here. Andy MacDonald, we just heard Chris Grayling saying that Labour was colluding with the unions over this industrial action. Do you support the industrial action?
That's not true. And if Chris Grayling's got any evidence of this terrible lie he's trying to perpetuate, let him come forward with it. He just gets up at the dispatch box and makes it up. It's just not true that there's been that sort of discussion with the trade unions at all.
Do you support the industrial action, though?
Well, I support passengers in their bid to have a railway that is safe and secure and accessible.
So you do support, so you do in your mind support the industrial action?
I find it staggering that the Tories are prepared to compromise on safety when it is abundantly clear that we need a second member of crew on that every train who is critically trained in safety. We've seen evidence of it. Look at the Watford issue just months ago. Driver incapacitated. Who led the passengers safely away from that train when that landslide happened?
Right.
It was the guard.
So,
and these people are talking about taking guards off trains and having them depart stations without that safety critical person on board.
All right,
it's playing. It really is a dangerous game they're playing.
I just want an answer to the question. Do you support the industrial action?
I do support the industrial action because it's standing up for passengers, for safety, for accessibility. These are things that we all should be standing up for instead of compromising on it and putting people at risk. I wish the Tories would just wake up and realise that that is what the people want, and it isn't beyond the wit to roster a train to make sure that it is properly staffed in terms of not only drivers, which they can't do at Southern because they didn't recruit enough or assess what was available, and making sure that second critical person is on board.
Right, so
it's a simple matter.
Hugh Merriman, you don't care about passenger safety?
Well, I do, because every single day I commute from East Sussex to Parliament, so of course I care about my safety and my constituents. But this strike is about a rejection of a 23% pay rise that we're talking about here. But this is not a strike based on the technology, that's the overtime ban. So for Andy MacDonald earlier in your programme to talk about whether it's morally wrong for people to be given big pay rises versus 1% pay rises for nurses, and then not condemn a strike where a 23% pay rise has been rejected by the unions is complete hypocrisy. Right,
I mean, it isn't, is it, just about safety, Andy MacDonald? It is about pay rises. Why should ASLEF go on strike when they have rejected actually a 24%, I think it is, pay rise, taking salaries from £49,000 to £60,000?
Well, you've got to get in the detail of that because this franchise
That's a massive
is
pay
predicated
rise.
on the basis... Hang on. It's predicated on the basis that people work their overtime, their days off. Do we really sensibly want to have a railway system that's run where people are working 6 and 7 days a week? This is crazy.
Well, hang on.
Recruit, train.
Hang on, Andy MacDonald, because let's just be clear about what was being offered, because as I understand it, the pay offer, as I say, would have taken the base salary from 49,000 to just over 60,000 for the existing 35-hour week, 4 days a week.
Well, you're going to have, ASLEF come on and give you their detailed
Right, so it's not
response,
a 7-day week, which is what you just said.
Well, but the whole basis, if you're running a railway on overtime, how mad is that? You should have people, you should have enough people properly employed to do their proper working week, and not rely upon people to turn up. And it's a crazy way to run it.
Right.
And Chris Gibb said so. If you agree, the Gibb report says so.
All right, well, let's go back to Hugh Merriman, because actually there was overwhelming support for rejecting that pay rise, Hugh Merriman. So if there was overwhelming support for it, then the grievances must be big.
Again, we have to be clear. This rejection has been on pay. The overtime ban that's in place is about the technology. So this is purely about pay. And it just can't be right when pay is only going up by 1.8%, that a 24% pay rise can be rejected. And I would just urge the drivers to think about my constituents, commuters, who are not earning anything like this money in the first place, doing more than 35 hours per week and can't get to work and are losing their jobs for their commute or not seeing their families. It's so unfair. And Andy McDonald needs to think about all workers and not just a certain type of worker that may belong to a union that subsidises the Labour Party.
Right, but what about the company? I mean, what about Govia Thameslink? Do they not take responsibility, Hugh Merriman, for the appalling service that they have put out there to passengers and commuters on a daily basis?
Well, of course, they've just been penalised by £13 million, which is their share under the contract for short-form formations or cancellations. But what's been made quite clear from the independent report is that the primary cause of the appalling performance has actually been the unions. So therefore the £13 million is a small proportion of the blame, because the big proportion lies with the unions for going on strike where they can't justify it because the new technology has been deemed safe. We've had an independent safety rail regulator confirm that, and it's on board on 30% of the network and has been for decades.
Right,
and the real madness
but the thing is, the unions reject that, Hugh Merriman, and they've rejected it continually. I mean, I hosted a debate not that many months ago where the whole safety argument was actually challenged, you know, by the unions continually in the way that Andy McDonald has stated. And until that is resolved, then these actions are going to continue.
Well, you may remember, Joe, I was one of the people there. And the point at that stage was that the unions were demanding that the independent rail safety regulator gave his opinion. And I was keen for that as well. He did so after your programme, and he came back and said, this has been used for decades, it's safe across the country, it's safe on Southern. As soon as that came out, it was deemed to be a whitewash. So every time the evidence is laid bare that this is safe and it's normal, then there's just another excuse that comes up as to why the strike's going on. And there's no logic in this, which just leads me to believe that this is some form of collusion between the unions and Labour to try and bring down the government.
McDonald's rejected the collusion
argument. But they're messing around with my commuters' lives in doing that, and it's incredibly selfish.
And Andy McDonald, I mean, you talk about Chris Gibb, the Gibb report, but actually they did find that union action was the primary cause for the network failure. The company has been fined, the unions have called it a slap on the wrist, but the primary cause, he said, is down to union action. Do you accept that?
Joe, who paid him?
Who paid who?
Who paid Chris Gibb?
You tell me.
Who paid Chris Gibb for that report?
He's supposed to be independent.
Well, how are you independent if you're doing a report into an organisation that's paying you?
So are you saying that this report? Well, you just quoted from the report and said it was a good thing. So you're now saying because he was paid.
Joe, there's lots of good things in the report, but fundamentally,
except for the bits you don't agree with.
Well, if you've got somebody who's in the pay of them, I really do think, you know, let's have a honest think about this. But the £13.4 million fine, isn't it remarkable that a good deal of that is getting recycled into doing what we've been asking all along? More people on trains, but without that guarantee. Why don't the government just wake up, make sure there's a guard on every train and get this strike over? Because I know people are talking about the pay that's been rejected by ASLEF. Well, this is about safety, it's about security and about accessibility. They want a good railway, they want the best railway in the world, and it's about time we had some sensible conversations about it.
Well, it may be about safety, but it is also about pay, just to be clear. Hugh Merriman, what took the government so long to act on this?
The force majeure clause, so the clause that requires the government to work out who's responsible for this. And I've been through that contract through the Transport Select Committee. It's quite a technical clause. So Southern would say it was all down to the fault of industrial action. The government has been able to demonstrate that some of the cause is down with Southern. So I'm willing as a politician to be critical of Southern, but also critical of the unions. The problem I have with the Labour Party position is that they're completely one-sided. They won't look at this in a balanced way. They're not being responsible, and they're showing they're not a government in waiting because they stick up for well-paid individuals rather than passengers that rely on the trains to get to and from work and to see their families.
Hugh Merriman, Andy MacDonald, thank you both very much.
I've been